Hello and welcome to Lean Reds, the channel that turns powerful books into simple lessons for growth and inspiration. What if everything you thought you knew about weight loss was wrong? For decades, we've been told to eat less fat and count calories, but the Obesity Code reveals a shocking truth. Obesity is not about calories, it's about hormones, and the key culprit is insulin. If you'd like to read the full book, the link is waiting for you in the description. Now, let's jump into it. The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung, first published in 2016, challenges long-standing assumptions about obesity at a time when the world is facing a global epidemic of overweight and obesity. The book asks two crucial questions. What is the real cause of obesity? And what can we do to protect our health? Dr. Fung argues that we must first dismantle some of the most deeply ingrained myths, that all dietary fat is harmful, and that weight loss is nothing more than a simple equation of calories in versus calories out. Instead of following this outdated path, he takes readers on a scientific journey, drawing on the latest research to reveal the true culprit: insulin resistance. This book not only explains in detail how hormones regulate the body, but also reframes obesity not as a failure of willpower, but as a hormonal disorder. This shift in perspective opens the door to effective, sustainable strategies for weight loss, helping us regain control of our health and well-being. Dr. Jason Fung is a Canadian nephrologist and head of the Intensive Dietary Management Program at Scarborough Hospital in Ontario. He is widely recognized as a leading expert on type 2 diabetes and obesity. Beyond the Obesity Code, he has authored several acclaimed books, including The Diabetes Code, The Longevity Solution, and The Complete Guide to Fasting. For decades, the story of obesity has revolved around a single villain: calories. We were taught that weight gain is caused by eating too many of them. This calorie obsession, as Dr. Fung calls it, is one of the most damaging misconceptions ingrained in us since childhood. These ideas may sound logical, but they rest on shaky science. Worse, they have fueled countless ineffective yo-yo diets where weight is lost and regained in cycles while ignoring the true driving forces behind the obesity epidemic. This book lifts the veil on these outdated beliefs and goes straight to the heart of the matter. Based on the latest medical research, Dr. Fung shows that most fats are not harmful at all. In fact, they are essential to a healthy diet. The real hidden culprit, the one pulling the strings, is refined sugar and carbohydrates. Why? The answer lies in a powerful hormone that governs countless processes in the human body: insulin. Our journey begins by exploring the complex mechanisms of insulin. Once we understand the science, we can finally take the right steps to protect our health and break free from the grip of obesity. The classic debate: genetics or environment. Like many social issues, obesity is often framed as an endless debate. Is it caused by nature or nurture? Is the root of obesity found in an individual's metabolism or in their lifestyle choices? The answer, as it turns out, may surprise you. Recent research suggests that social environment is not the primary driver of obesity. We know this from scientific studies examining how environmental factors influence children as they grow. The clearest way to measure this is by studying adopted children and comparing their weight to both their adoptive and biological parents. This is exactly what researcher Albert J. Stunkert did. His landmark study of adoptees in Denmark, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1986, was groundbreaking. Denmark was the ideal setting thanks to its meticulous adoption records, allowing Stunkert to make precise comparisons. The results were astonishing. There was no correlation at all between the weight of adopted children and that of their adoptive parents. This showed that environmental factors such as family eating habits had almost no effect on whether a child became obese. At the time, this was a radical challenge to the prevailing assumption that social environment was the main factor. The idea that early exposure to junk food automatically led to weight problems was dismantled. What remained as the most likely explanation? Genetics. But Stunker did more than disprove an old theory. He provided compelling evidence for a new one. When he compared adoptees to their biological parents, he found a very strong correlation. Children of obese biological parents had a much higher likelihood of becoming obese themselves even if they grew up in a thin adoptive family. In a follow-up 1991 study, Stunker quantified the effect. Genetics accounted for roughly 70% of a person's risk of obesity. The myth of calories in equals calories out. Many people still believe, almost instinctively, that weight loss is just about how much you eat. The common logic goes, eat fewer calories, and you'll lose weight. It sounds simple enough, but here's the problem, it's not entirely true. In reality, there is no direct cause and effect relationship between calorie intake and obesity. The confusion rises because people who consume more calories often do show higher rates of obesity. For example, a 2004 report noted the average daily calorie intake in the U.S. rose by about 250 calories per person between 1971 and 2000. But this was not the direct cause of America's obesity crisis. A 2014 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association made this clear. Between 1990 and 2010, average calorie intake did not increase, yet obesity rates kept rising by 0.37% per year. Clearly, simply reducing calorie intake is not enough for weight loss. Why? Because body weight is determined not only by calories consumed, but also by how many calories you burn. In other words, energy expenditure matters just as much as energy intake. This leads us to another misconception, the assumption that calories are automatically converted into fat. The reality is far more complex. Calories fuel countless processes in the body: heat production, protein synthesis, bone and muscle growth, brain function, even an increased heart rate. Fat storage is just one of many possible uses. Obesity, then, is not simply the result of overeating. It is fundamentally a problem of how the body uses energy. In some people, calories are more likely to be stored as fat. In others, they are channeled into building muscle, bone, or mental performance. And ironically, society only considers the fat-storing pathway to be a problem. The calorie reduction trap: what happens if you suddenly cut your calorie intake while continuing to burn the same amount of energy? The answer is simple: you would die. That's why the body has a built-in defense mechanism. It automatically lowers energy expenditure when you eat less. We've known this for a long time. Take, for example, a classic 1919 study conducted at the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. Participants were placed on a strict low-calorie diet, consuming 400 to 2,100 calories per day, about 30% less than usual. Researchers wanted to see how the body would respond. The results: one way the body does this is by slowing metabolism, with a host of negative side effects. This was demonstrated in 1945 by Dr. Ansel Keys in Minnesota, who was studying famine in the post-war years. In his experiment, participants drastically cut calories. Instead of losing the expected weight, they constantly complained of feeling cold. Their metabolic rate responsible for regulating body temperature had dropped by up to 40%. Their heart rate slowed dramatically, from 54 beats per minute to just 34. Their brain function also declined, explaining their apathy and inability to concentrate. These findings reveal a clear truth: simply cutting calories is not a viable solution for weight problems. Why? Because calories themselves are not the villain we've been taught to fear. The real culprit lies elsewhere. Insulin, the hidden driver gaining weight, in fact, is easy. Contrary to common belief, the most effective way to gain weight quickly is not by binge eating. It's by injecting yourself with a hormone your body already makes, insulin, elevated insulin, and the hormonal imbalance it creates is the true underlying cause of obesity. This was supported by a 2013 study by Fung, which found that about 75% of all successful weight loss efforts could be directly attributed to lowering insulin levels. The study also noted that drugs, which raise insulin, cause weight gain, while drugs that reduce insulin promote weight loss. The key takeaway is this: your body is not under your conscious control. Who, or rather what is really in charge? The answer is hormones. These chemical messengers dictate how you feel and behave. Ghrelin makes you hungry. Leptin tells you when you've had enough. And then comes insulin. Once insulin levels rise above a certain threshold, your hormonal balance is disrupted, driving behaviors like overeating. The exact mechanism linking high insulin to obesity is still not fully understood. One plausible explanation was proposed in 2000 by Dr. Robert Lustig, an endocrinologist and obesity expert in California. He suggested that insulin interferes with leptin's normal function. Normally, leptin rises after meals to signal your brain that you're full. It also rises when body fat increases, suppressing appetite and encouraging weight loss. But in obese patients, the opposite is observed. Their leptin levels drop after meals, meaning they never feel full. Without this natural feedback loop, they continue eating, and even as body fat accumulates, leptin remains low. Lustig's theory linking insulin to leptin dysfunction and therefore to obesity is compelling, but it still lacks definitive experimental proof. Insulin resistance and the hidden danger of snacking. Talk show queen Oprah Winfrey has had a very public struggle with weight loss. After shedding more than 60 pounds in 1988, she gradually gained it back. Since then, she has lived through a cycle familiar to anyone who has tried dieting: endless ups and downs on the scale. What makes dieting so difficult? High insulin levels may be the key culprit. Over time, this leads to insulin resistance. To understand it, we first need to understand insulin itself. Insulin is the hormone responsible for removing sugar from the blood and moving it into cells, keeping blood sugar levels in check. When you eat carbohydrates or sugar, your body produces more insulin to manage the spike. But when sugar and refined carbs are consumed in excess, this finely tuned system breaks down. Eventually, your cells stop responding properly. They become resistant to insulin. As a result, they take in less sugar, and the body responds by demanding more food. People with insulin resistance often feel hungrier and find it much harder to lose weight. That's also why diets rarely work long-term. The body keeps pushing you to eat, and eventually, willpower gives way to biology. One of the major drivers of elevated insulin is snacking. Every snack triggers another insulin spike. If you're constantly grazing between meals, insulin levels remain chronically high. Ideally, insulin should rise during meals and then fall for several hours, giving your body time to reset. But constant snacking disrupts this balance, leaving insulin levels persistently elevated and fat storage continues. Poverty and obesity. A modern paradox. In the past, poverty was associated with thinness and undernutrition. A frail frame was seen as a symbol of hardship. But in modern society, the opposite is often true. Obesity is more closely linked with poverty than with wealth. One striking example comes from the Pima people, a Native American tribe in the southwestern United States. Today, about half of Pima adults are obese. But it wasn't always this way. In the 19th century, the Pima were strong, resilient farmers and hunters. The shift began when white settlers disrupted their land and way of life. Forced into a marginalized society, the Pima diet changed drastically. Cheap, refined foods, white sugar, processed wheat, corn-based products like bread, pasta, and cereals became dietary staples. These foods were inexpensive and easy to store, but they fueled insulin resistance and rapid weight gain. as poverty deepened. Reliance on cheap refined foods grew, and health declined. The Pemer story mirrors a broader American reality. Across the country, disadvantaged communities rely heavily on cheap, low-nutrient foods, and obesity rates soar as a result. Unsurprisingly, the poorest states like Mississippi also have the highest obesity rates. Why are sugar, corn, and wheat products so much cheaper than fruits and vegetables? The answer lies in U.S. agricultural subsidies. A 2011 report by the U.S. Public Interest Research Group found that 29% of subsidies went to corn production and another 12% to wheat. These massive subsidies artificially lower the price of refined foods, making them far cheaper than fresh produce. The outcome is predictable. America's poor eat what is cheapest, and obesity has become the disease of poverty in modern society. The truth about dietary fat. When obesity began to be recognized as a public health crisis in the latter half of the 20th century, both experts and the public quickly embraced what seemed like a logical conclusion: people gain weight because they eat too much fat. There was only one problem: the hypothesis was wrong. In fact, most dietary fat is not nearly as harmful as we were led to believe. Although the fat is the enemy idea became deeply ingrained, scientific evidence had long suggested otherwise. A prime example comes from the famous 1948 Framingham heart study conducted by Harvard scientists. The study set out to investigate the link between heart disease and high cholesterol, assuming that dietary fat was to blame, but the results contradicted the hypothesis. There was no meaningful correlation between fat intake and cholesterol levels. Still, the fat is bad narrative was so entrenched that even scientists resisted their own findings. In 1981, another group published data in the New England Journal of Medicine reaffirming the same conclusion, yet still dismissed it, clinging to the old belief. Today, research has confirmed that the early studies were correct. Does this mean we can eat fat without concern? Not exactly. The biggest exception is trans fat, a man-made fat that is genuinely harmful. You've probably heard of saturated fats. These molecules are saturated with hydrogen, making them more stable and less prone to spoilage than unsaturated fats. While many natural vegetable oils are unsaturated, industrially processed oils like margarine are artificially hydrogenated to extend shelf life. This process creates trans fats. Trans fats may be convenient for the food industry, but they are dangerous for human health. A 1990 Dutch study showed that they raise harmful LDL cholesterol and lower protective HDL cholesterol. Further studies confirm the risk. Just a 2% increase in trans fat intake can raise the risk of heart disease by as much as 23%. The practical solution: cut sugar. And some good news about coffee. So, what does all of this mean for your daily diet? The core message is clear: fat is not the enemy, sugar is. Reducing sugar intake drastically lowers your risk of obesity and related diseases. Sugar wreaks havoc in several ways. Most importantly, it spikes insulin levels, leading to insulin resistance, especially in the liver. The problem lies in fructose, which is metabolized only in the liver. Excess fructose overwhelms the liver, forcing it to convert the surplus into fat, fueling metabolic disorders. Even worse is high fructose corn syrup, HFCS, while regular sugar is half glucose and half fructose. HFCS contains mostly fructose, making it even more damaging. That's why cutting back on sugar is the single most effective step you can take. Remember, sugar often hides in places you least expect, so always check food labels. If sugar or HFCS is near the top of the ingredient list, it's best to leave it on the shelf. But living healthy doesn't mean giving up all pleasures. Here's some good news. Coffee is not harmful. In fact, serious research shows the opposite. A 2005 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that coffee provides more benefits than risk. Thanks to its abundance of antioxidants and magnesium, both linked to heart and bone health. Later studies in 2008 and 2012 connected coffee consumption to lower risks of type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. Of course, this doesn't mean you should drink liters of coffee daily. Moderation is key. As researchers have yet to reach a definitive consensus, the path to weight loss is not about slashing calories or blindly exercising harder. What truly makes the difference is avoiding foods that trigger insulin spikes above all, sugar and refined carbs, while resisting the temptation to snack constantly. Obesity is a serious and growing public health crisis. For decades, we have been misled by simplistic stories that promised quick fixes: avoid fat, count calories, and the weight will melt away. The truth, however, is more complex and far more empowering. Obesity is largely driven by genetics interacting with insulin levels. The real culprits are not natural fats, but the wrong kinds of fats, trans fats, along with refined carbohydrates and sugar, which push the body toward insulin resistance. Reduce these, and you dramatically lower your risk of obesity and its related diseases. One practical strategy highlighted in the book is intermittent fasting. It is an effective way to reduce insulin levels and counteract insulin resistance. Of course, this should be approached responsibly, consulting with a doctor before beginning. A simple start might be fasting 1 day per week, drink water, skip meals, and break the fast with a light dinner of protein and vegetables, avoiding sugar and starch. Done consistently, this method helps lower insulin, improves health, and supports sustainable weight loss. Reading the Obesity Code completely reshaped how I think about weight, health, and dieting. For years, I believed the common narrative: eat less, move more, and avoid fat. But Jason Fung's work makes a compelling case that obesity is not simply a failure of willpower or a basic math equation of calories in and calories out. It is, at its core, a hormonal disorder driven by chronically elevated insulin levels. What struck me most was how persuasively Fung dismantles myths that have dominated public health for decades. Fat is not the villain we were taught to fear. Sugar and refined carbs are. Dieting is not about deprivation. It's about understanding the body's hormonal rhythms and working with them. Concepts like intermittent fasting, once considered fringe, suddenly make sense in light of the science. This book left me both unsettled and hopeful. Unsettled, because it reveals how much of the advice we've been given was misguided. Hopeful, because it shows there's a way forward, one rooted not in gimmicks or endless struggle, but in aligning our eating habits with the way our bodies are designed to function. Ultimately, the Obesity Code isn't just a book about losing weight. It's about reclaiming control over health, cutting through industry-driven myths, and seeing food not as an enemy, but as a tool for healing. Once you finish it, you'll never look at dieting or snacking the same way again. And so, we've come to the end of this concise journey through the Obesity Code. I hope it has been insightful and useful. If you'd like to explore more, the book link is in the description, a great way to support the author and dive deeper yourself. Don't forget to like, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss new content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.